Genesis chapter 2, verses 5 through 7. Now as of yet, no shrub had appeared upon the earth, no plant had sprung up from the ground, for Yahweh God had not released the rains upon the earth, because there was no one to till the land. And then springs began to bubble up across the face of the earth, and streams began to flow across the ground. And then Yahweh God took some of the dust of the earth and formed it and shaped Adam, the very first human being. And then Yahweh God breathed into Adam's nostrils the very breath of life. And Adam became a living being. It's interesting to note that the origins of the divine human connection are in the act of breathing. Breathing, which is a part of our autonomic nervous system, which in other words we never think about, which we do involuntarily, is where God starts, almost as if to say that even in the things you don't think about, God is there. That much intentionality, that much detail has gone into the creation of us, we who are called human. Paul refers to us as God's masterpiece. And when we think about how God put such nuanced work into our creation, I can see what Paul is getting at. And yet, even though it's something that God never intended for us to have to think about, we live in an age when we're thinking about breathing. In the age of the coronavirus, some of us have known people who've caught the disease and struggle to catch their breath. I suspect a lot of us have wondered what it would be like if we caught the coronavirus, or what it would be like to struggle to take our next breath, or to be placed on a ventilator. Certainly, that creates more than a little anxiety, maybe even a little fear. I mean, think about it. The thought of not being able to breathe, to simply just catch your breath, that's scary. I can only imagine how scared George Floyd was Monday night in Minneapolis. Are you aware of the story? He's the African-American man who was arrested by the police. He was the African-American man who had an officer place his knee upon his neck and hold it there with his body weight upon it for several minutes until George Floyd passed out and then passed away. Not able to breathe. Something that's intended to be automatic and involuntary, and it was taken from him. Now I know today and in the next few days we're going to hear a lot of media reports that are going to highlight some things. There'll be those who point out that in the Minneapolis police directives, this neck hold is a legitimate act for officers to use. There will be others who will say, okay, there's some bad cops, just like there's some bad all of us. We can't paint everybody that way. And it's not my intent today to paint police officers one way or the other. But it is my intent to say a couple of things. First, we are God's masterpiece. We're all intended to be able to breathe and to embrace this life that God has given us. And if we are structuring a society in a way where some are able to do that and others aren't, then we need to work on that society. And secondly, that we live in a world that has systems in it. And sometimes there are systemic problems. George Floyd is not the first African American who has died this way. It is a part of our culture. It is a part of our history. And it's not enough to simply say words like this in a devotion and shake our heads and say, that's tragic or that's wrong. We need to use moments like this devotion as a starting place for the hard conversation about who we are, about how we've fallen short of being the masterpieces that God calls us to be, and how we need to challenge ourselves and feel the challenge of God's Spirit within us, the challenge of God's scriptural call for justice, the challenge of just, doggone it, what is right. To take the world from where it is to where God calls it to be. Where everyone can breathe without thinking about it and without fear. Amen.